All right, everybody, welcome back to Cool's Interviews. Today, I think it's going to be a really fun journey into a bunch of different topics. I have some questions written down, but I think we'll get into a lot more than just those, so I'm pretty excited. As you can see, Sam is here as usual, and Mark Eddy has returned to talk some more information with us. And our guests today, we have Johnny and Helen. Johnny and Helen, how are you two doing?
Doing very well. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, doing well.
Yeah, no, thank you both for joining us. This is an exciting episode for us. For anyone that maybe doesn't know you guys, you want to give a little brief background of what you guys do?
Well, Helen and I host an internet radio show on the internet radio station Radio Once More. We're on live every other Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, and it's totally nostalgic. We play old time radio shows. We'll play a little music. Helen's a Beatles fan. She'll play a Beatles song. And we have phones if people want to call in, say hello. We also accept requests. We have a collection of old TV and radio and commercial spots. Everything and anything nostalgic is what we do. And we've been doing that a little bit over 10 years. And we have a good time with it. We don't take it too serious. And we have lots of laughs. So we hope some of you folks give us a listen and give us a call and say hello.
Yeah, for sure. We'll make sure to put links in the description below. But you kind of mentioned nostalgia.
Hmm.
What is the power of nostalgia with old-timey radio? Like what is it about listening to an old radio program or song that just brings that nostalgia to the foreground?
Well, when I think of old time, what I love about the power of old time radio is that you do not see the pictures and I'm, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of old time television and cartoons and films, but there's something very special about old time radio. You are a big part of the process. Your mind is processing all the visuals. You're the director as far as the colors, the costumes. You're a big part of it. The dialogue and music and sound effects are provided for you, but your mind puts things together as far as what things look like. And so that makes it very unique and special as opposed to television and movies that to one person, the Lone Ranger may look different to another person, for example.
It's the theater of the mind.
It is indeed a theater of the mind. And there's not much of that nowadays, but I kind of fell in love with old time radio back in the 1980s when I was in high school, and I've loved it off and on since then. So plus the nostalgia part of it, I remember my mom and dad telling me about the old times of radio. That Johnny, there was one time there was no television. What? No TV? And yeah, we got all our entertainment and news and information from the radio. And when this became exposed to me by accident, because I was listening to a Phillies game on the radio, I said, "Oh, must have been what mom and dad were talking about," and I fell in love with it.
Yeah, you mentioned listening to baseball on the radio. We read a book, Glory of Their Times, which was about the early days of baseball, and there was multiple chapters where they would be like in some really, I don't know, back hotel as cheap as they could get because they weren't getting paid, but they made sure they had radio. And so that was definitely something people tuned into. It's very different now. I think people think of radio just as music, but everything was radio back in the day, right?
Hmm.
Definitely, yes.
Well, what was like your favorite? Like if you had to give a good introductory program for someone to listen to, what would it be?
Okay, for say a newbie that's never
Hmm.
really experienced it. Helen and I are partial to the scary horror,
Sci-fi.
sci-fi type shows. And boy, some of those are outstanding. And you listen to them, you wondered how could this be done on television? Just the mind. There's no limitations with the mind. But there are a couple that we both love. One of them, it was a series called NBC Presents Short Story, and they did a radio adaptation of the short story what was her name? Who wrote it? Shelley
Shelley Jackson.
Shelley Jackson, The Lottery. And they did such a wonderful job. It's got a shock ending, but they build it up. It's a half-hour production, and just short, step by step, they build it up, and you're listening to it. I remember the first time I listened to it, and something's weird. You're not sure what it is, but you just keep going, and they unravel a little more, and they unravel a little more, and then you get that big payoff at the end, and you go, oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one. I would recommend it. It's called The Lottery
By Shirley Jackson.
And you could look up, I'm sure it's everywhere. You can download or YouTube. NBC Presents Short Story. Very well done. From the couple of the scary ones, like the Hall of Fantasy, one of my favorite series was the Hall of Fantasy. And that was one of the first ones that I listened to beginning back in the 1980s. And it starts with the intro is amazing. Am I allowed to play a little sound effect? Can I play you a short intro, if I may?
Yeah. Okay.
So this is the intro to the Hall of Fantasy, and I'll tell you how my mind processed it, and I'll recommend one particular episode for you folks out there. This is the intro that you heard from the Hall of Fantasy.
And now, the Hall of Fantasy. Welcome to the Hall of Fantasy. Welcome to the series of radio dramas dedicated to the supernatural, the unusual, and the unknown. Come with me, my friends. We shall descend to the world of the unknown and forbidden, down to the depths where the veil of time is lifted, and the supernatural reigns as king. Come with me and listen to the tale of...
Okay, there was part of the intro to the Hall of Fantasy. Now, we were talking about how radio and your mind and your experiences make it uniquely your own. And when I first heard this, again, in the 1980s when I was in high school, when you hear the pounding of the drum, and the narrator's voice, our tour guide, so to speak, he's going to take us to the corridors of the Hall of Fantasy. The vision that I created, it goes back when I was a kid. I was with the Cub Scouts, and we took a tour of the Pentagon in outside of Washington, D.C. And what I'll never, ever forget, our Cub Scout group, he took us a tour throughout the entire Pentagon, walking backwards. And I just thought that was amazing. We're following him. He's walking backwards. He's giving us history about the Pentagon, showing us things. So that was always, I guess, been in the back of my mind. And now listening to this, I picture, this is me, and everyone may have a different vision, where a group of us are walking down the corridor of the Hall of Fantasy. This tour guide's about to take us into, the episode. And in my mind, I picture him walking backwards along with the pounding of the drum, and he's taking us down. And that's kind of what I put together in my mind. And this was a really special series that I really fell in love with. In terms of old time radio, with a lot of the collectors and fans out there, not a very big series, but personally, I fell in love with it. And there's a few really good series. And with it being radio, you can stretch and do things that, it just doesn't seem to make sense on in a movie or television. And one of the first episodes that I fell in love with, and Helen likes it also, it's called He Who Follows Me. And it's basically, in a nutshell, and we'll probably laugh at it, but it's true, but it's funny, but it's very scary. It's about a dead man who gets out of a coffin and chases a couple across the country as they try to run away from him, because he's sore at them because they disturbed his grave. And the thing about it is they're driving like crazy, and no matter where they go, there he is. He's walking up in the room above them, and he hears their footsteps. And it sounds silly, but it's actually very well done. So it's He Who Follows Me, and the series is The Hall of Fantasy. And I have one more for you, and this is probably one of the biggest ones in the world of sci-fi. And there's two really big sci-fi series in the golden age of radio. The first one was Dimension X. That came out right around 1950. And then that went off the air, and about 4 or 5 years later, a follow-up series called X-1. And these were like some of the first sci-fi old-time radio shows that were more adult, not geared toward the kids, like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and what have you. And there's some really great episodes, great authors, Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, and others. But one of the episodes that just knocks my socks off, and again, I heard this when I was in high school, from X-1, it's called Tunnel Under the World. And when you just listen to it and go through it, and then again, there's a big shock payoff ending. So those are my 3 recommendations for the newbies.
Well, Johnny, what was the Lighthouse one with?
That's another good one.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, Vincent Price.
For pure horror, that's from a series called Escape, and it's called 3 Skeleton Key. And
That starred Vincent Price.
Vincent Price starred in it, and basically it's 3 lighthouse keepers, and evidently a derelict ship crashed
into the reefs.
into the reef where the lighthouse is. And then as they're looking out to see what's going on, there's no crew, but all of a sudden thousands and thousands of rats are running out of this ship, and they're trying to storm and get up into the lighthouse. So these 3 lighthouse keepers are running up and trying to protect themselves from this army of rats that has one thing in mind: to eat these guys. It's a great thriller. Thanks for mentioning that, Mark. Yes, that's a great one. 3 Skeleton Key from a series Escape. There's 2 versions. Get the one with Vincent Price. I think that's a tad better.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, alone on a lighthouse island, you ain't got a lot of places to go hide.
Exactly.
One of the things I like about what you and Helen do is, play the show. People, Vincent Price's voice is pretty recognizable, but you do draw our attention to who some of the voice actors were. A lot of these shows maybe came out in the late 30s, 40s, and Vincent Price would go on to be in all kinds of horror movies, made a big name for himself in the genre, but he got his start almost 90 years ago in radio shows.
He played Simon Templar in a radio version of The Saint. In fact, what we did before we even started our internet radio show on Radio Once More, what's kind of started all that is years ago after work, Helen and I would stop at a local coffee shop in downtown Mount Holly. That's where we live, Mount Holly, New Jersey. And I love fall. I love this time of year. And I said to Helen, wouldn't it be neat if at a coffee shop in the evening, maybe they had a special old time radio night where we could all kind of gather together, enjoy our coffees, and maybe listen to some scary old time radio shows together. And Helen liked the idea, and probably about 3 or 4 weeks later, when I had enough courage, I mentioned it to the owner and the manager of the coffee shop. And they were all pretty young folks, and I thought they might poo-poo that idea, but actually they said, that's an interesting idea. Why don't you do me a favor and put it in writing, and we'll see what we can do with that. So I was pleasantly surprised. So I poured my heart and soul in it, and I wrote out, what they could do with that, and they loved the idea. So that was in October of 2012. We did a presentation at the coffee shop. The name of it was the Daily Grind, and we did our first old-time radio presentation at the coffee shop. We called it Fright Night. It was Halloween time, and we did 3 scary shows, including 3 Skeleton Key.
Mm-hmm.
And It went over pretty well. In fact, my boss, the gentleman that runs Radio Once More, Neil Ellis, he drove up from Maryland to sit in on it, and he enjoyed it, and that's when he propositioned Helen and I to be part of Radio Once More. So it really, and what I did, what Mark was saying, when I put the presentation together, this is geared towards folks that may not know much about old time radio. So I tried to pick something out to kind of bridge them to what they would know. Many actors and actresses that you might know from television, many of them from the world of cartoons, Mel Blanc, Alan Reed, Dawes Butler, they provided lots of voices. So I would pick something that I thought they would know, and I would play a clip of that. And then that would kind of help bridge them to what they did know and kind of bring them a little closer to it. So I know there was a specific X-1 episode that Jan Miner had a role in. Now, many people may not know who Jan Miner was, but then I played a clip of the old, what was it? Palmolive commercials. And she, on these commercials, she played Madge, the manicurist. And then so many times when I played that, they go, "Oh, Madge, yeah, I remember her. So she was in this radio show." So that was a good point you brought up, Mark. And I try to do what I can to come up with something to kind of bridge it in between what they do know, and then it gives them a closer connection to the golden age of radio.
So obviously sharing and preserving the legacies of these shows. And this is a question I like asking some of our historians, because we've had a lot of historians come on and talk about why that piece of history is important. But why is it important to share and preserve these shows for future generations?
Well, it's part of our history in that long before the internet and television, this is how we in our society, we were entertained. That's how we got our information. That was a big part of the day was the radio. You don't just click on the TV and watch the news. You would listen to it on the radio. You would get your entertainment from the radio. It was everything. So I think that's important for folks to be aware of that. I know when I talked to some young folks and I said about some of these radio shows, and they're a little confused. And I said, we play shows on the radio, and they say, "Wait, shows? I don't get it. How do you see it?" Well, I said, well, you don't see it. Your mind creates the pictures. It's different. There is more work involved. That is true. You're a part of the process, as I said. But the benefit, it's really a wonderful, gratifying experience when the show is over and you go, "Wow, that was very entertaining. That was very enjoyable."
I think I read in Arlen's new book, there was one of those Twilight Zone voices, female voices that went on to be the voice of in Rocky and Bullwinkle.
June Foray. She was Talkie Tina. That's what you're referring to.
Oh, I'm okay. I couldn't think of the name. I was trying to find it, real quickly in the book, and I didn't see where I underlined it. But
she did a lot of radio, and of course, we all know she did a tremendous amount of cartoon work and voiceover work, and she was that eerie Talkie Tina doll episode of what was it called? Living Doll episode of the Twilight Zone.
And she was Rocky the Flying Squirrel.
Rocky the Flying Squirrel. And you hear other J. Ward productions. And even in some of the Warner Brothers cartoons, she provided some of the female voices, along with Bea Benaderet. Bea Benaderet, who was big in radio and TV. She was on the Jack Benny radio show, the Jack Benny TV show. She did lots of voices for Warner Brothers cartoons. You also may know her as Kate on Petticoat Junction,
and Betty Rubble.
On the Flintstones. So she was very big in radio, cartoons, and television.
That's quite a resume.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Well, and then so obviously radio is really big. How did that influence, in your perspective at least, the early TV series? Like, what did they take from the early radio dramas and integrate into their shows?
Talk about Gunsmoke.
Yeah, lots of radio series moved on to television, and some folks may not be aware of that. Some of the landmark television series, such as Helen mentioned, Gunsmoke, that actually started on radio before it moved to television. It was a totally different cast. Some of the cast members were disappointed that they were not asked to move on to the TV series, but maybe because of physical limitations, they just didn't have the look that you were looking for television, which is, I guess, another wonderful thing about radio. You create the look of that character in your mind. And many times I've heard people say when they see a picture, go, oh, that's not what I pictured at all in my mind. They're just that good of an actor. But as far as Gunsmoke, if, of course, we all remember, well, I guess a lot of us remember James Arness played Matt Dillon, big, tall marshal. I don't know if any of you guys know. Do you know who played Matt Dillon on radio? Certainly not the physical type you would picture for a tall marshal, but the actor's name is William Conrad. Do you remember the TV series Cannon?
Mm-hmm.
He kind of quite a stout guy, and an amazing radio actor. He did a lot of radio.
And he was also the narrator for Rocky and Bullwinkle.
He was a narrator on Rocky and Bullwinkle. He was a narrator on the TV series The Fugitive. And he did a lot. She just did a lot of work, period. Radio and television, cartoons as well. He was also the spokesman. I don't know if you remember this, but they're on YouTube. You can check them out. In the 70s, when they were doing a lot of promotion for anti-pollution. And there was a famous series of commercials where they showed a Native American Indian who was saddened by all the pollutant of the land
traveling around. Yeah.
And it ended with him with a tear streaming down his cheek. And you hear the narrator say, people can start pollution. People can stop it. That's William Conrad doing that.
And also one of the more famous women radio stars was Agnes Moorehead. She was on many, many, many old-time radio shows, and we know her as
Endora
on Bewitched.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't she get her start on The Shadow with Orson Welles?
She was part of the Orson Welles, the Mercury Theater group. She did Shadow with him, and she in radio she became very active on the series Suspense.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was known as the first lady of suspense. She did quite a few incredible episodes, and if you want to check one out, probably the most memorable one is called Sorry, Wrong Number. Very, very suspense-filled episode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. Yeah, Mark brought up Orson Welles. I was like, that's a good voice right there.
Yes.
But yeah, you talk about voice acting. There's a lot of, different talent you have to be able to do voice acting versus physical. Some people are lucky enough to have both, but even in today, you see like really good actors try to do voice acting and they don't have it. Like you got to have a certain skill to, bring that character alive just using your voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a skill that you got to have such a range, and back then, speaking of Orson Welles, you had to almost do it on the fly. He was very active in numerous productions, and there's stories out that in New York City, where a lot of the shows were broadcasted live, I think he found a loophole that you're allowed to use an ambulance,
Mm-hmm.
even if it wasn't for an emergency situation. So to get from one studio to another, he would use an ambulance to get there on time. And sometimes he would get there literally with just seconds, and they would hand him the script, and they would say, you're this character, you're that character. And then he would just on the fly play it out. It was a totally different world back then. It's just very amazing.
Well, and speaking of Orson Welles and Halloween, obviously I think everyone knows of War of the Worlds on Mercury Theater. Who knows how much of it was as dramatized as, you see everyone leaping in water, but it did scare people listening to it, because if you listen to it, I've listened to the original one, It sounds like just a normal kind of broadcast with music and news, and then there's the news breaks coming in. It is really quite an entertaining listen.
Well, they came up with that whole concept of doing it as a news report, which was, I guess, the first time that's ever been done, and it was brilliant.
Because that's everyone got their news, their normal news from the radio,
Right.
and they did a lot of little cut-ins. Play some music. Oh, a news broadcast. Play some music. Oh, some more news about the Martians.
And the story that goes along with that is that ran on CBS. It was not a big hit show. It didn't even have its own sponsor. It was what they refer to as a sustaining show, meaning the network paid for it. Basically, it wasn't sponsored by a big corporate company. But over on NBC was Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, and that was clearly the more popular show in that time slot. Well, the story goes, and I don't know how true it is. I don't know if it could be an urban myth or not, but the story is that there was a singer that came on, Jeanette McDonald or Nelson Eddy. So I can't remember the name of the singer. And when they did their intros on Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, and then they got their opening, and then the singing starts. If you do a side-by-side comparison of the War of the Worlds to that show, right along when that song is playing is when they kind of kick up the action of War of the Worlds.
And on another station.
So it's almost
so like, they're like channel surfing on the radio.
Right. It's almost like, in fact, it was portrayed. There's a movie out called, what's the name of that made-for-TV movie? Helen will look it up. I can't remember the name of it, but they showed in the movie. Matter of fact, the actor was Mike Constantine. He's listening to the radio, and then all that music comes on, and he goes, "I'm not listening to that." And like Helen said, he's switching over to CBS, so he misses the whole intro that this is the CBS Mercury Theater production of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, and so he missed all that, and then he just hears these news cut-ins. So was that planned? I don't know. Maybe
Orson
not.
Welles says no. Yeah. I think I think the one you're talking about it's called The Night That Panicked America.
The Night That Panicked America. It is out on DVD. I would check it out. It's very interesting. It gives you an idea of, I think it's somewhat on the money as far as how they did things, and it gives you an idea what it would like to see a radio production. How they did it.
And we're from New Jersey. And Grover's Mill, New Jersey, is only about 25, 30 minutes from where we live. So that town has kind of taken off a little theme of War of the Worlds. That's and they have like little presentations, and there's a coffee shop with a War of the Worlds theme.
Yeah, when you go into this coffee shop, and it's the whole motif of it is War of the Worlds. They even have close by a plaque dedicated to that night. So even the Martians pick on New Jersey.
Yes.
That was ground zero for the Martians.
Johnny and Helen, there. I think Martin's coming up to be a guest. I'm sure. He'll probably be covering his, a little bit of his Twilight Zone book. He has a Lone Ranger book. I think that was his last one. But his book on the radio series The Shadow is very interesting. And we're just talking about Agnes Moorehead. She's kind of getting her start there. Then she and Orson go to do Citizen Kane, and she's Mrs. Kane, Charles's mom. She has a couple really important lines in the movie, but about 18, 19 years later, when she's in the Twilight Zone, she's in an episode where there's almost no dialogue at all. So that's just like one of those examples of, she becomes very well known for her voice by the time she's doing The Invaders. She's skilled enough to pull the whole show or the whole episode off by grunts and swinging at the aliens.
It is.
And
That's true.
yeah, then you mentioned a little bit ago that she would be in Bewitched, just a few years later. So, yeah, I think what I've enjoyed over the years of listening to you and what Neil and Walden and everyone contributes is what a really rich legacy that group of people that kind of got in with the foundations of radio, doing the series. They really influenced a lot of people in a good way.
Yeah, I know from the comedy side of things, Jack Benny's probably one of my favorites, and he probably one of the few, not a whole lot of comedians really successfully transitioned from radio to television. Jack Benny did a wonderful job, and so many people have mentioned that Jack Benny was their inspiration, and they just took a lot from him. He was just an amazing character, and a lot of people, and I haven't watched it. I'll admit here, I've never seen the series Seinfeld, but it is on my list of shows to see. I do have the whole series, but many people, I remember my brother used to always tell me, he said, "It's a great show, Johnny. Watch it. It's a show about nothing," and it has a lot of similarities to the Jack Benny show, because the Jack Benny show was about the Jack Benny show. It was the star Jack Benny going through his life. Talking about, what guests can we get on the next show, and the people dropping in. And so really it was kind of interesting because it was Jack Benny was playing Jack Benny, the radio show star, and his cast, and it was just, but it was so well written, so well crafted that those episodes, and by the way, he was the boss of the show. He called all the shots, he did all the hiring, firing, and so forth. And they made the decision with his writing staff that we would choose non-topical humor, and which was a wonderful choice. You would pick things like his vanity. He always talked about his blue eyes. He always talked about how cheap he was. They got a lot of mileage out of him being cheap, and things like that. And these things, they were funny back in the 1940s, and they're funny now. And so you can listen to some Jack Benny radio shows and literally laugh in today's world. In fact, some of the Christmas shopping episodes are some of the best comedy I've ever heard of. He did the same storyline every year where he would go to a department store and do Christmas shopping. And the clerk in the episode was always played by Mel Blanc. Yes, Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, all those voices. And he played the role so incredibly well. What Jack would do, he would always change his mind. "Oh, clerk, I changed my mind. I want this." And he would just go back and forth and drive him into a frenzy. So if you look up any of those Christmas shopping episodes with Jack Benny and Mel Blanc, they're so funny.
Well, you brought up like the trouble comedians had in particular transitioning. Why do you think that is? Is it just a different presence you have to have when you're actually in front of the camera or on the stage?
Oh, that's $1 million question. You know what? I really don't know, because I don't know. It's just, I guess it's the luck of the draw. I really don't know why Jack Benny was great. He just did it. Maybe, as I said, maybe since he picked non-topical humor. Another very popular radio show was Fred Allen, the Fred Allen Show. He In fact, they had a fictitious feud going on for years with Fred Allen and Jack Benny, where they would exchange shots at one another. You know, oh, did you hear Benny on his show? Oh, did you hear Fred Allen on his show? And it was labeled as the Benny Allen feud. Of course, it was just all in fun. They were very good friends. But Fred Allen, different than Jack Benny, his was topical. So if you go back and listen, and I'm not saying it's not funny, some of it is very funny. But if you listen to some of the old Fred Allen shows, you know, I tell people you're going to need like your encyclopedia or, you know, maybe an almanac or something to get some of the references, because you have to know what was going on in the world back then to understand the humor. And by the way, on the Fred Allen show, there was a really interesting segment, really funny segment called Allen's Alley. And he would have a topic and a question of the day. And he would go through all these characters in Allen's Alley. There was a guy named Titus Moody. We once had a cat that I named Titus Moody after Titus. I did. Mrs. Nussbaum. And the one that was probably one of the more popular ones was Senator Claghorn. And it was played by his announcer, Kenny Dalmar. And if you listen to the exchange with Fred Allen and Senator Claghorn, you're going to say, geez, that sounds familiar. And what it is that the character Senator Claghorn was later on, that character was used as a basis for the cartoon character Foghorn Leghorn. So if you listen to that exchange, you said, that sounds familiar. That sounds, if you're familiar with Foghorn Leghorn, you know, like where you said, that's a joke, son. You know, that was one of the common things he said. So that was kind of an interesting part of the Fred Allen show. Not saying it was a bad show. It's just I don't like it as much as others, maybe just because I don't understand many of the references, of the topical references. But to go back to your question, Keegan, about why is it? Wow, your guess is good as mine. The listeners, the audiences, they're a finicky bunch, and I really don't know why. In some aspects, it sold. You know who was not good on radio, but more popular on television was Milton Berle. Not great on radio, but he really hit it on television. And to answer that one, I would say because he was much more physical humor. His big thing back in the 50s was dressing up in dresses and things like that. And you could see that. You can't see that on radio. So it's a partial mystery on that.
Oh, he does it in the Rad Video Round and Round. He revived his.
Is it Milton Berle you talk about?
Yeah, I think. Yeah,
Okay.
Isn't that the same guy?
I don't
think he's in that video from like 30 years later.
Maybe. Are you aware of that? No, maybe. I don't know. I know he was like a regular on Bob Hope show and the Dean Martin roast, and he had his own TV show, which I don't think I ever watched any of his TV. I just remember him being kind of a guest on many variety type shows. He even on the Batman TV show, he played the arch criminal Louis the Lilac. If you like Batman.
Well, and speaking of Batman, I mean, Shadow and Zorro were kind of mixed together to make Batman in a way. And so, yeah, so it's an interesting kind of thing. You talk about like things that continued on, like Shadow, I know, has had comics here and there. But Batman, in a way, has continued that legacy to today and becoming one of the most popular comic book characters of all time.
Superman was on. He successful. I think on every platform he appeared on. I guess he was first in the comics, comic books, funny papers, whatever you want to call them. There was on radio, many years on radio. Bud Collyer did the voice of Superman. There was a serial, a movie serial. I think Kirk Allen played Superman there. And then, of course, the George Reeves television series, which to me will always be, I love that series. And I've heard rumors, I hope it's true, that they're going to re-scan all the original films and maybe in 2025 release it on Blu-ray. That would be nice for the Adventures of Superman to come out on a really nice, pristine set on Blu-ray. We can always hope.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad that physical media is going down. I know streaming is popular and it's convenient, but it's also nice to have those originals. You can hold them in your hand or sit them on your shelf. So
Also, the Lone Ranger started on
yes,
radio and transferred over to television.
Although what's the Lone Ranger movie?
Nah, we don't talk
the
about
Johnny
that.
Depp Lone Ranger movie. Very sad. Very, and what we're concerned about is that, you know, in future generations, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when they mention the Lone Ranger, and as long as Martin Grams is around, he'll set the record straight, I'm sure. But if people look at that Johnny Depp movie as the definitive Lone Ranger, oh, I feel bad for the Lone Ranger, because that, to me, that was a disgrace. I just didn't care for it. I didn't care for his Dark Shadows movie either. I'm a big Dark Shadows fan, and that they broke my heart.
Well, you mentioned George Reeves, kind of off topic, but did you ever see the movie Hollywoodland about him?
We did see it. Yeah, the whole theory that it was not suicide, it was homicide.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting. You know, it makes some sense. He had everything to live for. So, who knows?
Yeah, that's one of those great unsolved mysteries, right? Yeah, there's a lot about that. So, like, obviously, we think of movies in Hollywood. What's like the mecca of radio when it was in its heyday?
You mean like radio to movie, or
No, like radio, like location, like where were they mainly producing the radio
mostly New
shows?
York. Yeah, mostly New York at first. Then some were produced, moved to Hollywood. In fact, it's for CBS. Let's see. I think they did. There was a great detective series called Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar. And over the years, many people played Johnny Dollar. And the most popular one was, I forget his name. What was it? Shame on me. Look that up if you will. He was the definitive Johnny Dollar in most people's opinion. And this is when they were moving it, producing it out of Hollywood. And
Ed Bailey? Was it Ed Bailey or the other one?
No. I can't remember his name.
Hold on.
But then when CBS decided to, this is probably when kind of radio is slowing down and evolving, and television's taking over.
Bob Bailey.
That's it. Great. If you want to ever listen to some neat adventure, and it's funny because it's about an insurance investigator. And you're going to say, really? You know, a show about an insurance investigator? That sounds boring. But actually, it's very, very exciting, very fun. There's even an episode you mentioned earlier about Vincent Price, where Vincent Price is a guest on it, plays himself. And the whole idea is that Johnny Dollar is investigating some insurance claim, and it has to do with Vincent Price, who was a very well-known art collector. And that's a pretty interesting episode. But when CBS was consolidating radio operations and moving, I guess, everything back to the East Coast in New York, Bob Bailey, who was pretty much situated in California and was happy there, if I have my story right, he just didn't want to go back, so he stayed in California, and then so they had to get someone else to play Johnny Dollar in New York. But yeah, I think first it was mainly New York, East Coast, and then they did some moving into Hollywood, and then
Chicago did some.
There were some
radio stuff too.
Other places, maybe certainly some syndicated series, but I would say mostly New York and Hollywood. Probably like it was in early TV. You know, they did a lot of live stuff in New York before everything pretty much went to Hollywood.
Yeah, Hollywood kind of ended up taking everything, because for a while there, early westerns and early movies were made here in Colorado. And then, of course, Hollywood came, and they're like, it's much better weather, just send them out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I know that the early films, way early films, like Edison Time, was in New Jersey area.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I guess we can kind of say this was the early Hollywood before Hollywood became Hollywood.
I
Hollywood East.
enjoy that movies are still called movies because it was just about them moving, and that's what we still call them today. Just like, yeah, it's a movie.
Yes.
One of the topics that just kind of really has been really interesting me for the last, I don't know, maybe 3 years or so, is that a lot of bands have been, modern bands have been getting some of their inspiration from a lot of the blues and jazz songs from the 30s and 40s, and it's like, Pat Travers has, say, his swing CD that came out just a few years ago. One of the songs that you've played that I think is really interesting is Lydia the Tattooed Lady,
Oh,
and
Groucho.
you learn a lot of history if you look at her tattoos.
Yeah.
It's kind of a risque song, but you could see where uh maybe some things slipped by the censors at that at that time. Maybe a lot of the artists were uh way over the censors' heads. They got their points across in unique ways. And there's people like Groucho that maybe kind of got some of that stuff started. Uh, you know, and he continues to be an inspiration to other artists. What are some uh, what are your reflections on Groucho's legacy or the Marx Brothers? He would go on to host a popular TV show. What do you think of the comedy from the early days?
Well, Helen and I love Groucho.
Yes.
And if any of you folks out there uh love Groucho as well, I got to give a plug to our friend out there. There's a one-man show traveling all around the country, An Evening with Groucho, featuring Frank Ferrante as Groucho. So well done. Every show is a little different. I mean, sure, it has its formula, but he, in Groucho form, he interacts with the audience, and it's just a memorable one-man show. And he goes everywhere. He's even been
He's been to Australia. He's been to
yes.
England.
He's officially sanctioned by the Marx family as Groucho. In fact, I think he's part ownership in it now as far as GrouchoMarx.com. So check that out. An evening with Groucho, right? That's you'll find it. Frank Ferrante, and tell him we said hi. But as far as Groucho, now that's an interesting point when it comes to like television, radio, films. Groucho was such an amazing, arguably the quickest wit of all time. He just was an amazing, fast-thinking guy. The only problem when it came to, like, he was dynamite in his movies. Those Marx Brothers movies are great. The trouble that most of the people said with him is that he didn't like following a script. He would go with it, but many times he would ad lib and ad lib and ad lib some more. And directors don't like that. They want you to follow the script, but that was just Groucho. And then when he moved on to radio, they had trouble finding the perfect vehicle for him. Because again, he liked to ad lib, and you had time constraints in radio. You had to make sure you got your commercials in. You had to get the show done on time, because if you weren't done, the network would cut you off and go right into the next show. And so finally, I believe the gentleman's name was John Goodell. Does that
Mhm.
sound right? He was doing a show with Art Linkletter, and he saw Groucho somewhere, I forget where, and he came up with an idea of the perfect vehicle, and it was he was on the money with it. He came up with the idea, the whole concept, the quiz show, You Bet Your Life, and it was a quiz show on the surface, but the bottom line, it was a place for him to showcase his wit and to interact with the contestants, and it was just a dynamite hit on radio. And he was not constrained by any script whatsoever. And he just had to read a few questions and things. He had George Fennerman as his MC. And it just, when you, that started on radio first, for those of you who don't know that, the You Bet Your Life quiz show. It ran on radio, and then it moved to television. As a matter of fact, it ran on radio and TV simultaneously for a few years, and then continued just on television. But to this day, I love just sitting and maybe just having them on in the background if I'm working on something on a computer, and throw some You Bet Your Life episodes on. I still laugh like crazy. It's just him interacting with the contestants and just being silly, and his wit is just unbelievable. I don't know if that answers your question, Mark, but that's, Groucho Marx is just an amazing guy, and I love listening to his quiz. Some people, it might be a little borderline cringy for him because he's picking on them a little bit, but he's just having fun. As a matter of fact, if for you folks that like game shows, on YouTube, they has a complete collection of every available What's My Line episode. And there's I know there's one episode, I'm thinking it's in the early 60s. I don't have the date off the top of my head, where he's the mystery guest, and he does all these crazy dialects, and the panel has no idea it's Groucho as the mystery guest. But when he steps on there, he just takes charge. And John Daly just kind of gives up. He goes, "I give up." It's really a lot of fun. He was an amazing entertainer.
Right, one of those once in a generation entertainers.
Yes.
And you were talking about like not following the scripts. It kind of brought to mind Marlon Brando, where they kind of were like, "All right, he's on set. Just let him do whatever. We'll film around him." You know.
Jackie Gleason.
Yeah, Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason did not believe in. Supposedly, they said he said he had a photographic memory, and he didn't like the idea of rehearsing. He wanted to keep it fresh. And a few years ago, Helen and I met Joyce Randolph, who played Trixie on The Honeymooners, and she told some Gleason stories about, that was all well and fine for Mr. Gleason, but the co-stars liked a little bit of rehearsal, so they would have a stand-in to be, Ralph Cramden, but she said it just wasn't the same. And if for those of you that love the Honeymooners, the classic 39 episodes as they're referred to, supposedly, even though he had this self-claimed photographic memory, there's quite a few episodes where he forgets a word or he forgets something. In fact, I think what I read was that if he like taps his tummy or rubs his tummy, that means, uh-oh, I forgot a word, I need help. And so whoever he's doing the scene with, they gotta help him out of it. But nonetheless, I love Gleason, and I love the classic 39 episodes. So
Yes, we're gonna have to watch it and look for those little tips.
yes.
You just mentioned that you met one of the Honeymooners actresses. You also you and Helen also had your photos taken with Terry Garr, who just passed away the other day. Okay, you go to a lot of these conferences. What are your reflections of having a chance to meet Terry? You've met Al Lewis.
We just met Kate Jackson. We met little Vicki Lawrence just recently, this past weekend.
Oh wow, okay.
And also Barbara Bain from Mission Impossible.
From Mission Impossible,
and Space
93.
1999.
Yeah, and she's doing well. It's amazing. And we met her former husband years ago, Martin Landau.
Wow. Okay.
It's a joy to get to meet so many of these folks, and 99% of them are so down to earth and friendly, and we have a wonderful time. And you don't get too much of a time to sit and chat, because there's a long line behind you of people that want to get their photo op and get their autograph photo, but just a few words you can share with them, and it's been a joy. And we love attending the conventions. So up in North Jersey, there's Chiller Theater, which they have twice a year. And you mentioned Martin Graham's, his convention down in Maryland, the Middle Lake Nostalgia Convention, one of our favorites. That's another great convention. And in addition to meeting the celebrities, just the mere fact of so many friends we've met over the years at these conventions. Oh, it's wow, what a joy. As a matter of fact, we met Neil Ellis
Yes.
at one of those conventions.
It was the Friends of Old Time Radio.
Okay, that was probably at the Friends of Old Time Radio
Yes.
first, and then later on at Martin's Middle Lake Nostalgia Convention. Of course, Neil Ellis is, as I said, the one that runs Radio Once More. So had we not met Neil, you guys may not even be talking to us.
Isn't it amazing, like, how just things work out? Like, I was telling Sam on our way back from New Mexico, our little trip to Roswell it helped us meet all these Billy the Kid historians, and that has led us down a whole different path. And it's just amazing how sometimes that works out like that.
Absolutely. Series of choices. What I it's a newer show, but I really fell in love with it. A sci-fi show called Fringe, and Walter talks about the choice not taken, the road not taken, and their big thing was parallel universe and all that. And I always think about that sort of thing. What if this didn't happen? What if that didn't happen? What if how many different diagrams can you draw? Well, there was that big movie that had a zillion. What was that one called?
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yes, I mean, to talk about it, and that really one of the most bizarre films I ever saw, but I really enjoyed it, and just many different scenarios that you never know what life is going to bring you. So I'm very happy with where everything's gone. Get to spend time with you folks, and everything's cool.
When you're meeting the actors and actresses from these conventions, it sounds like, based on what you're saying, is they're really appreciative of what people think of their work from might be 50 years ago, but that takes us back to one of the first statements Keegan made was the role of nostalgia in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
The role of nostalgia in our lives. Oh, well, that nostalgia takes to 24/7 for me. With all the politics and division and hate that's going on in our country, I don't play in that game. So I decided a few years ago, I stopped watching all news. I don't watch network news. I don't watch local news. Well, Helen says we'll watch the local news if we need to wear a coat or not, just on the weather. But I don't watch any more news. I don't get a newspaper anymore. I was shocked to find out a Sunday paper is $5 now. So maybe that was a good decision. So no newspapers. My whole day is pretty much nostalgia from when I get up to when I go to bed. Helen and I, we have a ritual every night. It's just the two of us. We don't have children. We set up the TV trays in the living room. And every night when we have dinner, we pick a classic old-time television series. And we start it from episode 1. And then we'll just run through the entire series with dinner. And, over the years, we've done the entire run of Dark Shadows. We've done Mission Impossible. We've done quite a few. Right now, we're doing Have Gun, Will Travel with Richard Boone. And then just a couple years ago, I came up with the idea, why not? Let's work in a couple cartoons. So we've been through few cartoon series along with the TV series, and I love it. You know, some people may say, "Well, you're not aware what's going on in the world. You know, you're living like an ostrich." And I said, "Well, all right, guilty as charged. I'm living like an ostrich, but I'm a happy ostrich." So
Yeah, you're better off.
thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say not too much good stuff going on in the news, so I'm pretty much with you there. I don't really watch it. I kind of base the snow predictions on how busy the grocery store is.
Yeah. If it's
Oh.
going
Yeah.
to snow, the bread's gone.
Did you guys recently get some snow?
Me? No, we were supposed to this morning, but no snow, at least where we are. It's the latest we've not had snow. Usually it's September at the latest, early September. So I thought it was going to today, but didn't quite get there.
I mean,
That's
it was sprinkling, but it wasn't like an actual snow. But there was like little flake / rain going on.
I have a friend that lives in Casper, Wyoming, and I think they got a couple inches of snow recently.
Yeah, it's like 80 on the East Coast.
Ugh. It's going to be 80 tomorrow and then 65 on Saturday. So
Yeah, have you started Johnny Quest for your dinner time cartoons?
I love Johnny Quest.
I love Johnny Quest.
No, not yet. In fact, for that, we would have to make that be the TV series since there are half-hour cartoons, and we can do that. That's okay. It ran in prime time. That is allowed, along with Jetsons and Top Cat and the Flintstones and so forth. Usually, the cartoons that we're choosing are the short, you know, like the 7-minute ones, like we did.
Woody Woodpecker. We're doing that one
next. We're going to do Woody Woodpecker. We've done Mighty Mouse. We've done Heckle and Jekyll.
We did the Mighty Hercules.
Mr. Magoo, the Tex Avery cartoon shorts, and we'll just mix in.
We did Popeye.
Did all the Popeye episodes. We will do, if it's a half-hour TV series, we do four half hours. If it's an hour television series, an hour long, we'll do 2, and we'll mix in a cartoon with every hour's worth of and that's just kind of what we do, and we enjoy it.
Well, here's kind of an off the beat question, and you kind of talked about it earlier, but how much can a remake kind of just destroy the audience's want or viewpoint of an older material, say like a radio show? Because we kind of talked about this with the new Wolfman remake, and the design there is just terrible. But you kind of brought up with Lone Ranger. But do you see instances where material was really good and it helped people go back and look at the old radio shows or TV shows that came out before?
That, if you're lucky, yeah, that's the positive of these remakes, that maybe the person will go to the original. Usually my thought process on that is, you know, why bother? It was done. It was wonderful. Are we so limited we can't come up with new ideas? I kind of feel bad about that. But if they do, maybe at least they'll go to the original. And some of them have been okay. I've enjoyed, I mentioned Dark Shadows. I didn't mind the revival series in, what was that, in the 90s with Ben Cross. It didn't run that long, unfortunately. I think it was the war that knocked that. I think that's when we were doing the Gulf War and people weren't watching it. But that I didn't mind. And, you know, they had a little bit more of a budget and could do some more things.
And also a good old-time radio comedy, Our Miss Brooks, which is about a teacher in a school. That went very well on television, and a lot of the same cast moved over to television too.
It did.
And Father Knows Best, that was an old-time radio, and then it's also now, you know.
Yeah, quite a few radio shows moved to television. Here's an interesting spin on that, and I mentioned that we're watching Have Gun Will Travel. This is an exception to the normal pattern. The TV series Have Gun Will Travel with Richard Boone was on first, and then they created a radio series featuring John Dehner as Paladin. So that kind of goes against the grain. Just something a little different, but a little trivia for you folks.
Now, do you have a favorite, like, actual old-time radio? Like, I see some stuff behind you, but, like, what's your favorite radio?
Oh, yeah, that That is just a
Prop.
yeah, that's not
It's
an
a radio.
It looks like an old time radio, but actually it has
cassette.
a CD
Mhm.
and it's a AM FM radio, so it's more for looks. So I don't really collect. I know some people actually collect old time radios. That can be expensive. Plus, you have to have some handyman skills as far as fixing things up. I joke around with folks. I have 0 handyman skills. The handyman of the house is heaven.
That's me. We do have a couple internet radios.
We do.
That we listen to the radio once more, Yesterday USA. There's a couple of sci-fi channels on the internet radio, and they're blind friendly because there's a person on there that giving background of what's going on.
Yes, audio description.
Yes.
And that's kind of neat that when you I know there's in fact I've collected a few series. I have the original Star Trek series with audio descriptions, and they're kind of interesting, and they've done Fringe, and they've done I think All in the Family and some other series where they've added that, and that's kind of neat that they do that, because we Helen and I do, being in internet radio, a lot of blind friends, because it's very popular with the blind folks, and which makes sense.
No, it definitely does. Well, why don't you, before we end off, just tell us a little bit more about Radio Once More and where the viewers can find you guys.
Oh, thank you. We're on, Helen and I are on, we call it Woohoo Wednesday. We're on Radio Once More live every other Wednesday.
From 9 to midnight.
9 to midnight Eastern Time. www.radioOnceMore.com. The best way, Radio Once More, for those of you that still use Facebook, Radio Once More has a Facebook page. And whenever we do a live show, we always post it early in the day that we're going to be doing a live show. If you have any questions or you want to touch base with us, the email address you can email us is Johnny and Helen Holmes at AOL.com. Again, Johnny and Helen Holmes at AOL.com. I'll even give you a phone number, huh? How many people do that? You can, if you want to chat with me, we have a listener line that we use for the show, 609-845-3570. If I'm up here in the office studio and the phone rings, I'll be happy to chat with you. So thank you very much for this opportunity to get together and chat.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining, and we had a blast. I'm sure the viewers did as well. I'm hoping we get some good feedback and we can send them your guys' way. Mark, any fun projects you're working on right now?
Trying to wrap up the prehistoric book.
Which is good.
Yeah.
I can say.
Yeah, it's good that it's almost over. Then I get to delve into cleaning up parts 2 and 3. So it's a trilogy on trying to be like Marshall, Will, and Hawley dealing with the Paucoonies and Sleestacks in the Upper High Valley.
No, that's great. Yeah, I've the one you're working on was fun, and I can't wait for people to read it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I will say writing is tough. Sam knows I've been trying to write our book for a while now. It's just a lot of time and effort. But yeah, we appreciate all of you guys joining us tonight. This was a blast, and we'll definitely have to do it again. Maybe we can pick an old movie or TV show and really go in depth on that.
Well, since it's almost it's Halloween Eve, we still need to get into visiting Evans City Cemetery.
Yes, that was a very interesting trip for us.
Johnny and Helen inspired me to stop there and had a great visit.
That was a cemetery featured in the original Night of the Living Dead movie.
They're coming to get you, Barbara. That was a neat experience.
And that's in Butler City, Butler, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh.
So what were your guys' experiences there? See anything fun? No zombies.
We were just looking for like some of the tombstones that were in the movie. I got a picture next to a tombstone that that Barbara was standing next to, and
Yep.
there's a chapel there that they refurbished and redid that was in part of the movie. So it was nice.
Yeah, posting, oh hey, we're here, and Helen's imitating the scene against the grave, like yeah, it's actually interesting when you're there, like all the shots were pretty much filmed in a really confined space.
Oh yes, it's a very small cemetery, and of course there's people there visiting their deceased relatives, family, friends. So you don't want to be impolite or rude or anything while you're traipsing around a cemetery.
Well, there's a very beautiful restoration of Night of the Living Dead Criterion did recently. It's in 4K. They went back and took all the film reels and redid it. So if you guys haven't checked that out, I recommend
Yeah,
it.
it's only the first 10 minutes of the movie, and
Yeah, that's a classic.
Yes.
We got to meet him.
We got to meet
at Monster Mania.
Yes, we
George
did.
Romero.
They at one of our our
Cool.
conventions. They must have had 9 people from the movie: the sheriff, the little girl
That's
who kills
right.
her mother, and a
We met
couple.
Barbara.
We met Barbara. Did we meet Johnny? I think Johnny passed.
I can't remember.
But we met quite a few people from the original movie.
No, it's super cool. Yeah, George Romero. That's a iconic name in the horror, horror world. Definitely zombie world. There's quite a few from him.
You also met George Romero too.
Yes.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you guys again for joining. This has been fun.
Thank you.
So once again, Sam and I want to say thank you to Johnny and Helen for joining us, and make sure you guys go check out their Radio Once More show. It definitely sounds like a whole lot of fun. And also make sure to keep up with Mark Eddy. We'll make sure to tell you guys when his new book comes out. It was a really fun and interesting read, and we promise you guys will enjoy it. But until next time, guys, for more Culz interviews, click that link to your left. For more about us here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, do you have a favorite old-time radio program? Tell us in the comments below.